Let's see. And if you submitted questions before, just so you know, I do have those. So we will get to those questions. And just a second while I get the presentation up. If you want to go ahead and find that Q&A function, if you know you have a question already, you could pop it in there for me and we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so I, again, am Tara, one of the dietitians, certified diabetes education specialist as well, nutrition educator here at Pendulum, and I'm super excited to chat with you guys today about continuous glucose monitors and metabolic health. I'm going to go ahead and perfect. Thank you for submitting a question, Lindsay. I was hoping that function was working. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have an hour. I've prepared a presentation for us about the microbiome, continuous glucose monitors. If you don't know what that is, you will know by the end of the session. But if you have questions about your health or your metabolic health in relation to the microbiome, please submit those questions and we're going to kind of dive in today. Awesome. And Sarah, thank you for sharing. Sarah says she has a CGM on right now. So awesome. Thank you for sharing. So just for some housekeeping, this presentation is recorded. So many people emailed me saying they couldn't make it live. We are going to send this recording out a day after, so you will have access to it, and it will also live on our website as well. So that's going to take about 24 hours. If you have any questions, just give us a little bit of time, and we're going to answer those as well if we don't get to anything live. And just for our new customers, welcome. We're glad that you're here learning about Pendulum and the microbiome. We wanted to say thank you for attending this webinar. So there is a code, it's CGM15. You don't have to remember that, it's going to be emailed out as well, but it will be 15% off your first month subscription order if you've never ordered with Pendulum before. And this does expire. So just so you know, 9/18, it's going to expire that evening. And then if you have questions, nutrition@pendulumlife.com, please email us. Maybe wait till the end of the session. I might answer them live, but we would be more than happy to answer your questions. We're excited to chat with you guys. Let me see. I already have some questions coming in. Okay, I think we're going to address some of these. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit like what is a CGM? I'll use that in terms of continuous glucose monitor. That's that acronym. So what is a CGM? The microbiome and diabetes. So there is a connection. If you're not aware of it, we're going to discuss what that connection is. And then we're going to talk just a little bit about how your foods that you eat can impact your glucose levels. So it's not going to look the same for every person, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Pendulum does make a probiotic that's specifically been studied in people with diabetes. So we will chat a little bit about that. We also do have 2 other probiotics. I know several people were emailing me about acromantia or GI repair. So if you have questions about those, feel free to submit that. And then I'm very excited to announce, we all are at Pendulum, that we actually just launched a CGM education program. So if you are a new customer, you've never taken Pendulum glucose control before, and you wear a CGM, we'll talk about what that program is at the end of the session. We would love to have you join us for this really awesome opportunity. Okay, let's see. Wonderful. Okay, so if you didn't know, now you know. What is a continuous glucose monitor? So this is a really great resource for you to share with your healthcare provider, for you just to look at if you are a person with diabetes, or if you are just someone interested in learning what in the world are these CGM devices. You can actually go to diabeteswise.org, write that down. It's a great resource. But here you're going to be able to see there are several different devices on the market. If you have diabetes, I definitely recommend that you work with your healthcare provider. There's no one best device out there. It really depends on what you're looking for. There are several. You can see there's a Dexcom, there's a Medtronic, Guardian. The Abbott has a Freestyle Libre. And then Eversense is one that is actually, that one has a procedure where you insert a sensor under the skin. So that does take an office procedure. But basically, these are small devices, and most of them are going to have, with the without the Eversense, I could say all of them have a tiny hair-like wire that go under your skin. So it's not a needle under your skin, but there's this little sensor that people wear under their skin. And what it does is it doesn't measure your blood sugar. It measures your interstitial fluid every few minutes. So what happens is there's an algorithm within the sensor, works with a transmitter. There's a lot of things that can happen. It could even talk to your phone. But basically what you're going to look at is you're going to get not just the start and the end of a book is how I like to think of it. Like if you pricked your finger in the morning and you pricked your finger at the end of the day, you're missing the story of what's going on with your blood sugar throughout the day. So many people, the American Diabetes Association, Academy of Endocrinologists, several healthcare providers and institutions are now realizing the value of not only knowing what your A1C is, not only knowing what your fasting blood sugar is, but seeing the full story. So this is one way in which we have use technology to be able to see that. So these are replaced every 7 to 90 days. So the longest wear is that Eversense CGM device. And then with these other devices, they're either 7-day, 14-day, they have variable just times that you wear them and replace them. It will replace or decrease finger stick values. So that means some of these devices, you still do need to prick your finger and tell the device what your blood sugar is. That's called a calibration. Whereas others, you just put on that CGM device and it doesn't require any finger pricking to determine what your blood sugar value is. So anyone that wears one of these could probably pop on here right now and you could say, hey, yes, this is providing valuable insights about my diabetes. Occasionally people without diabetes will wear these as well. So they cannot get those through insurance at that time, but there is more information coming out that more and more people, even that don't have diabetes, may have elevated glucose, may have insulin resistance. There are several companies who actually will provide these for you. So we here at Pendulum, we are not a provider of the devices. We here at Pendulum, actually, we just work with customers that wear these. So if you wear a CGM device or know someone that does, definitely a really great resource to learn more about glucose trends. I'm going to see if there's any questions right here. Chat is disabled. Yes. Okay. So for today, we're only using the Q&A function. But if you wanted to send me a personal message after, you can definitely utilize that email. Thank you so much. And then let's see. Trisha, I'm going to answer this question live. Someone with potentially insulin resistance is trying to figure out how to keep their blood sugar levels steady going forward. Trisha, thank you for sharing. It looks like you wore CGM and you did for 2 weeks and you got really interesting information. And you, similar to many other people tuning in, may be wondering which of the Pendulum probiotics is right for you. So we do have a really good slide at the end that highlights the differences. For me personally, anyone with a family history of diabetes, insulin resistance at all, I would definitely recommend the Pendulum glucose control, and we'll talk about why, but there's some other benefits to the other probiotics as well. Let's see. So someone is asking, and Sean asked about glucose supplements, so our glucose control probiotic, and if there's any effect on the microbiome that would be detrimental if they take Trulicity. So really good question, Sean. I'm going to answer that one and then we'll move on with the presentation. So Trulicity, that is an injectable medication for those of you that don't know that is a part of many people's diabetes treatment plan. Trulicity is a GLP-1 receptor agonist. And so we have actually not studied in combination Trulicity with Pendulum in the sense that we do not know that there's any adverse reactions there. When we get to the slide where I can show you how Trulicity or how Pendulum works, there's actually some similarities there between what our probiotic does and how that medication works. There are certain drugs that have side effects that we know are detrimental to the microbiome. So prime example, antibiotics. If you take an antibiotic, it's killing your good bacteria in your gut, but it's also killing the bad bacteria if you need anything removed from your microbiome. Sulfonylureas, that is a class of medications that people with diabetes take, and some of those seem to inhibit the growth of some of the probiotic strains. We are aware of that. Great questions, you guys. Okay, I'm going to keep on going. So we talked about how this device gives you so many different readings, right? You're no longer just seeing little tiny pinpoints of your day. So what has happened is, with that information, if you wear one of these CGM devices, you now are able to see how much time you spend in a desired range. So I can speak to what the recommendations are for people without or with diabetes. I wish I could speak to what that would be without diabetes. There's no consensus statement. So just going to throw that caveat out there. I'm a dietitian, I'm a certified diabetes education specialist. As a medical community, there is research ongoing currently about what is a healthy blood sugar range for someone without diabetes, but there's not enough information currently for us to say, yes, this should be the target always. I think we will continue to gain that information. But what I can tell you is, for people with diabetes, the American Diabetes Association comes out with these standards every year and say 70 to 180. That's going to be the desired target that most people want to see those numbers from their finger pricks or from their CGM in most of the day. And so what is most of the day? Currently, the ADA recommends at least 70% of the time. So think about almost 17 hours of your day. If you look down at your CGM device, you want to see those numbers between 70 and 180. So please consult your physician for individual ranges. If you're an older adult with diabetes, this is often not as stringent, so you might see different ranges recommended for you. If you're a kid with diabetes, you might see some different recommendations. And if you're a person that you have pre-diabetes, you might not want to be spending 70% of your day between 70 and 180 because you're trying to prevent the onset of diabetes. So you need to be working very closely with your healthcare provider to figure out what's the best target for you. We can see here that low blood sugars are typically defined as a number of 54 to 69, and a very low blood sugar would be less than that 54. And then high blood sugars and very high, you can also see those as well. So let me see if I'm loving the comments. Okay, someone's saying, I can't imagine being over a certain number after a meal, and I'm going to answer this one live. So it's so interesting. Certain people, your standard may be a certain range, whereas someone else, they may have an A1C of 7, and you may have an A1C of 7, and you may see fluctuations that are very different. So that's why it's so important, in my opinion, to work super, super closely on a target that's going to be individualized for you. Ideally, yes, most of the time for people with diabetes, we could hit these targets. And then, of course, if we're being prevention minded, which so many Pendulum customers are, you're often going to be targeting numbers lower than this. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to keep moving just for now, and I promise we're going to come back to some of these questions. So many people that are tuned in today, and I can imagine many people that will be watching, you might have diabetes. So if you are new to Pendulum, I have to tell you, if you've not thought about your microbiome, which are the probiotics, all the bacteria in your gut, and diabetes before, there's actually a really strong connection. And so over time, there's several things that can impact your microbiome health. There's several things that can impact your overall health. So for people with diabetes, we know there is a genetic predisposition. So if you have a family member with diabetes, you are more likely to have diabetes. Certain changes to your diet and exercise routine, that could put you more at risk or less at risk for having diabetes. Things like stress certainly impact your health. It can definitely put you at a higher risk for having a metabolic condition such as diabetes. And then we know as we age, we're more likely to have diabetes. So they actually lowered the screening recommendation this year. It was pretty significant. They lowered it, I believe, by 10 years. So now Americans are encouraged to be screened for diabetes even sooner because we see it's happening. It's not a disease state that we see only at a certain age. It can happen really at any point in the lifespan. And then your environment, when you travel, and this happens to anyone, your microbiome shifts. So all of these things, it can shift your microbiome. And when you lose certain strains in your microbiome that help you metabolize food correctly, it can make it really hard to have that healthy blood sugar. So in the guts of people with diabetes, certain strains have gone missing or they're lacking functionality. So that's one of the problems we're addressing here at Pendulum. What happens if we reintroduce beneficial bacteria, probiotic strains? And that's just a little teaser, and I'll show you how this works here in a second. Let me see if I can answer some more questions. Okay, so someone asked, let me see, Lindsay asked, what is the normal range for glucose for someone who doesn't have prediabetes or diabetes, fasting and after eating? Okay, really good question. Let me see if I can go back, Lindsay. So we know what the ranges are right here for people with diabetes, but it's tricky when we don't always have that information for diabetes. So for someone with diabetes, that fasting number that's not listed here, the American Diabetes Association says they want to see that number between 70 and 130, and that's someone with diabetes. And then the American Academy of Endocrinology, so that's a like diabetes doctor specialty, they want to see it less than 110. So my recommendation for someone who's prevention minded for fasting, you certainly want to be, you don't want to be above the threshold of someone that has diabetes, right? So I would say, certainly trying to target at least less than that 110. However, I can't give an exact number. There's not like a consensus statement. I will say, when I go to my annual physical, they're kind of thinking like, oh, less than 100, that doesn't really raise a red flag for most people. That's my personal experience when I've been to my physician. And then after eating, we actually have a slide on that here in a minute, but after eating, there's different recommendations for someone with diabetes. So my answer there again is going to be for someone without diabetes, there's not a consensus statement. But keeping in mind what those thresholds are for someone with diabetes, we definitely want to at least be lower than that, right? We don't want to be falling in the range of someone with diabetes if we're trying to prevent our blood sugars from spiking to that level. I really think that's going to be a super individual conversation between you and your healthcare provider. Let's see. Okay, I've got a really good question from, I believe it's Fares. This is I love nutrition questions too, so y'all pop these in. Please address about stevia and monk fruit, which are metabolically the best sugar alternatives, and thank you. So I will actually say those are two of my top recommendations if someone's trying to swap from regular sugar, want to decrease that carbohydrate load. Stevia and monk fruit are two of the top alternatives that do not seem to impact the microbiome negatively. Actually, that stevia has shown to increase some of the, I believe it's the bifidobacteria strains, which are some of the good guys in your gut. So certainly I would recommend, those are actually the top two. I personally do not have a preference, one or the other, as far as my favorite microbiome friendly one. However, I'm a big proponent of if you can add variety with your diet, I think that's a good thing. So personally, I would maybe, if you did enjoy both, I might swap between the two. And certainly that over something like an aspartame product, which we know is very detrimental to the microbiome, or in studies it has shown to be not beneficial, kill off the good bacteria. Here's a really great question. So Samir asked, how can you use a CGM to determine if you have insulin resistance? So I got a lot of questions sent to me about insulin levels. So I just want to throw it out there that I am not a doctor. I would not be able to look at a lab value and give you a diagnosis. So this is the information that I'm sharing as a Pendulum dietitian. But with your CGM device, it's not specifically going to tell you like you have insulin resistance. If you start to see numbers that are greatly out of your target ranges, that's when you would want to go to your provider, and they would actually be able to run fasting insulin tests or look at your insulin levels. And that's where they could tell you a little bit more about being insulin resistant. This is basically like a supportive piece to that puzzle, right? You could use this information to help support that diagnosis. Okay, this is an amazing question. I say amazing because I get this, I think, like almost every day when I'm talking to my customers. So Martha's asking if she could take the glucose support, so the pendulum glucose control, along with Akkermansia together, or is this too much Akkermansia? So we'll get to another slide on this for those that aren't familiar with all of our probiotics, but I certainly have customers that do take the both products together. We have a wonderful chief medical officer, Orville Coulterman. If you guys have not had the pleasure of listening to him speak, but we do believe both doses together. You could take the 2 capsules of the glucose control plus the Akkermansia together. We do believe it would be a safe level. However, we don't necessarily know that if you're taking the glucose control, you have to take the Akkermansia too. So I think that's a really good question to kind of, if you have a chat with a pendulum dietitian, we can help you get to the bottom of that. If you're choosing between one or the other, my suggestion is always that glucose control contains the Akkermansia. And so the Akkermansia is a single strain alone. So my recommendation is typically let's go glucose, pendulum glucose control. But yeah, Martha, you certainly can take them together. But I guess my question would be why? Do you just don't have any Akkermansia in your gut and you really want to boost that? Or is it a different reason? So really, really good question. Okay. Oh, goodness. Okay, so Rachel had a good question, and I think she's asking, thank you for submitting this. Would wearing a CGM help me better understand hypoglycemia? And I would say yes, actually. So I have been talking a lot about higher range numbers, but hypoglycemia, as we can see, is going to be anything less than that 70 milligrams per deciliter. So if you're feeling symptoms of cold, shaky, clammy, sweaty after meals, if you've been to your doctor and you're aware that you struggle with hypoglycemia, this would be a really good thing to ask. Number one, would you write me a prescription for this? Is this covered by my insurance? As a learning tool to figure out what times of day are you having the hypoglycemia? Are there certain foods, certain activities that are triggering this for you? I certainly, I used to work in an endocrine clinic, and this would be a great resource for someone with hypoglycemia as well. Great question. Okay, we're going to move on with the presentation for now, and I'll come back to some of these great questions. Okay, so how does food impact the glucose? Again, I'm a dietitian. I love to talk about food. So all foods that we eat provide energy for our bodies. What I cannot tell you is for you as an individual, we could all, I don't know how many people are alive today. I think it was at least 100. We have hundreds of people, I think, that signed up. So we could all stand in line, put on a CGM, eat the exact same food. We would not have the same glucose response. Why is that? So we're all very different. Even if we eat the same amount of carbohydrates, the way in which our body breaks that down, metabolizes it, uses it for energy, how quickly that happens, it's impacted by so many aspects of our health. So I think it's important for everyone to know one of those pieces certainly is the microbiome. And that's why I think it's so important to make sure you have the right probiotics in your gut so that you can set yourself up for success, effectively metabolize these foods, help you support that glucose control, help you manage your blood sugars. But what I can tell you is that carbohydrates, these are foods that turn into sugar. Your body converts them to glucose the most quickly. So if you have a higher carbohydrate meal, if you're looking at your CGM, for most people, within a few minutes, you're going to start to see that number increase more quickly. Now, We are humans. Most of us enjoy food. We don't only eat carbohydrates. So here's an example, right? There's a meal and there's some oats. There's also some nuts. There's also some fruit. So this is a mixture of carbs, proteins, and fats. That's how we eat most foods. But when you think about your foods, you're going to kind of break them down into categories sometimes. Now, fats, oftentimes people that do have higher blood sugars, sometimes they lean into a more lower carb eating plan, and fats do not impact the blood glucose as quickly, but your body still can convert those fats into glucose eventually. It's typically, though, when you start to pair these fats with these carbs in the right proportion for you, or maybe even eating them at the right times of the day, depending on your activity, et cetera, that's when you start to learn more about your glucose trends and what's best for you. And then proteins, again, these are the amino acids. They're the building blocks for our bodies, but pairing things like proteins, fats, and carbs, finding that right balance. So classic example, I grew up eating Cinnamon Toast Crunch for breakfast. I would get hungry again as soon as I got to school, and I would buy a Chick-fil-A, what's it called? Chicken biscuit. When I would get to my high school, they had them right there. So again, I was not a dietitian at this point. That's not the choice that I would make today. However, what I realize now is, my goodness, I was setting myself up not for success. I was eating a bowl of sugary cereal and then getting hungry again. I was not feeling sustained. I have a feeling I was sending my body on a sugar roller coaster. So I was eating mostly simple carbs. There wasn't any fat or protein to slow down that digestion to keep me full, besides the skim milk that I was drinking, which maybe a little bit of that protein. And so then when I walked in, I would say, oh, I need that fat, that protein. Not always the healthiest. It was saturated, it was fried, right? So again, I'm not a food police. You can definitely share your nutrition stories, but maybe had I swapped my sugary cereal for a whole grain bowl with nuts and seeds on top and a really fiberful option like a berry, something like that, maybe I wouldn't have been on that sugar roller coaster all morning. So basically, all of these foods are going to impact your blood glucose a little bit differently. We are mindful of the carbohydrates and just thinking about those usually first, because they do have the quickest impact on your glucose. Okay, so I really like this as a picture. So everyone's going to have an individual response to different foods. If you haven't learned that by now, you probably are thinking about it and you're thinking, wow, I wonder what my response is. So here's that post-meal glucose target per the American Diabetes Association. So 1 hour after eating, so from the start of the meal to the 1 hour mark, they would recommend that blood sugar be less than 180. And then 2 hours after eating, after your body has some time to digest, you produce that insulin, you're getting that sugar into the cell, they recommend less than 140. So here's this little sugar roller coaster sometimes I feel that we go on, right? So we eat, our blood sugar goes up, our body has to make insulin, our blood sugar comes crashing back down. So this can happen. You can truly be on this glucose roller coaster. And so what we here at Pendulum would encourage you to do as your dietitians is we would love to work with you to figure out what pattern works best for you. But I'm going to give you a tip that typically when you're thinking about your microbiome in combination with your foods, with carbs at least, one of my favorite microbiome nutrition tips is choose those fiber-rich carbs. And I do think you'll start to see a difference. Fiber is not completely broken down into sugar, so you're not going to see as much of that glucose spike. It's going to be a fuel source for the microbes in our gut. So we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. And then additionally, fiber just has a lot of really great heart health benefits, a lot of great benefits for our GI tract as well. So go to some more of these questions. Let's see. Ooh, this is a really great question. Okay, this is Rick. So Rick he recently started using a CGM and he's testing it against a finger prick. The number does not line up. Any idea why that would be? Yes. And Rick, you're not alone. So the number actually should not line up. I would be shocked if you pricked your finger and it read the exact same. And I'm holding this up because I used to have my, the app, right, that said the CGM glucose value. I wouldn't expect it to ever be the same because the CGM is actually measuring something called your interstitial fluid, whereas the finger prick is measuring that actual blood glucose. So there is a little bit of a delay. You wouldn't expect it to be exactly the same. They typically can be, there's something called there's basically something called a MARD with the finger prick. So it's allowed to be a certain number of points off and still be relatively accurate. And then there's also an amount of time where it takes the interstitial fluid to match what a glucose reading would be. So I would say if you are having to calibrate your CGM device, if it's asking for a glucose reading, go ahead and do that and give it that reading. Outside of that, if you trust your CGM and you feel like that story is fairly accurate, I would go with that number, just knowing it's not always going to be the exact same as your glucose number, but it's still telling you that story. It's telling you what's happening overall with those trends during the day. So again, they shouldn't be exactly the same, but at the end of the day, you're going to be getting very comparable information or very comparable blood glucose values. And then the other thing about the finger prick is you can prick your finger once and it doesn't tell you how quickly that number is changing. So if you know your glucose on your sensors dropping drastically or rising very quickly, that's not my favorite time to calibrate because there's almost no way that's going to be like super beneficial for that CGM device, if that makes sense. All of the companies that have CGM devices also have help centers. There's great resources. And so specific to your device, I would definitely go to, your Dexcom support, your Libre support, Medtronic, and ask them specifically because they'll actually have different recommendations for you. Okay, let's see. I think I answered that one. You guys, thanks so much for these questions. Oh, okay. So I'm going to answer this question live. So Sarah, thank you so much. And we have a few Sarahs on here today. Sarah says she wears a Dexcom G6 and she does not have a diabetes diagnosis. And she shared that her device is through Synos. So there's actually a few companies out there. You could very easily do a CGM Google search. There are several companies that if you do not have diabetes and you're looking to get one of these devices, you actually could reach out to them, usually pay out of pocket, and they will deliver you a device. So definitely something that you could look into. Again, Pendulum, we don't personally provide these for you guys, but if you have them and you want to share that information with Pendulum as a part of the nutrition conversation, it's a great thing to share so we can best support you on your nutrition journey at Pendulum. And so Brandy's asking, is it possible to get CGM approved through insurance without a diabetes diagnosis? So I will say probably not. However, if you're working closely with a provider, you could still ask them to write a prescription for you and go pay out of pocket at the pharmacy. So some of these prices are going to be super variable. I would encourage you to go to diabeteswise.com for that. And you could see maybe out of pocket what each would cost. Really good question. And it's really, it's for people with diabetes, sometimes it's really hard to get these covered through insurance. Sometimes they're having to pay a lot even out of pocket themselves. And it's, something that can be a huge stressor for people. So I do want to acknowledge that. But I also am very aware that people that are prevention minded, that are aware there's something wrong, maybe in their bodies, or maybe they're just prevention, very focused on their health. It can be a great tool. So definitely have that conversation with your provider to see if they would be willing to work with you as part of your treatment plan. Okay, and then I'm going to save this question, Deborah. I'm going to talk about acromencia here in a second. Okay, and I will answer this question from Donna, and then I'm going to move on to a few other slides and come back to these. These are great. So as some of you may know, we actually have a prebiotic in combination with the probiotic in our capsules. This is only true for 2 of our probiotics. So we have Pendulum Glucose Control, and it does have a little bit of a prebiotic inulin. And then we have the Akkermansia, and there's also inulin in that product. There is not inulin in our GI repair. You'll see a side-by-side at the end. But basically prebiotics, it's basically just a fuel source for the probiotics. So we know that prebiotics can help support the growth of some of these strains. Certain people, Donna, I'm not sure if you're asking because you're sensitive to inulin. Some people know they are sensitive. We do know it's a very small amount of inulin. And if you need to know exact amounts, you definitely could reach out to us and we could let you know. But the GI repair product, it does not have that inulin at all if you're taking the Clostridium butyricum. Really good question. And it's actually, just so you know, there's a new word, if you haven't heard, it's called a synbiotic. So anytime you can combine a prebiotic with a probiotic, so the fuel source for the live bacteria, it's called a synbiotic. So if you ever see that on, any of your probiotics that you've seen, synbiotic is a combination of both of those. Okay, so pendulum glucose control, and I think this will answer a few questions on here. So it's specifically designed for people with type 2 diabetes. It actually has a study behind it. It's supported in clinical research. And when people took this pendulum glucose control for 3 months in a clinical trial, it helped them manage their A1C levels and blood sugar spikes after meals. So it has a unique targeted, those 5-strain formulation plus the prebiotic. And I believe I have a slide on here, but when people take this with diabetes in combination with their diabetes treatment plan, that A1C number that you might be familiar with, it did decrease by 0.6%. And then after meals, those numbers we've been talking about, roughly 33% reduction. So that's very significant for someone with diabetes to see those improvements from introducing a probiotic, something that's naturally found in the body. Okay, so here comes my science spiel. If you love this, take notes. If you're like, oh my goodness, I just want to know if it's going to work, I don't need to know exactly how, take a second. But we call this the mechanism of action. So we have 5 probiotic strains in our pendulum glucose control, and then we've broken the Akkermansia out and the Clostridium butyricum out. So these strains, I always tell my customers, you take them with food. They're going to travel down to your gut, your large intestine, your microbiome, and they're live organisms. So we're not just going to expect them to sit there. They're going to work for us. If we see a change in our body, something is happening. So we call that the mechanism of action. Some really cool things. I'm not going to touch on everything, but I will touch on for the pendulum glucose control. Basically, these 5 strains, there's a big connection obviously between what's happening with metabolizing our foods. And so one of the main things I like to point out, some of these strains produce butyrate, that is a short chain fatty acid that is involved with this basically it goes down and it's going to go down and it's going to talk with this GLP-1 pathway, which then has communications with your liver and pancreas. So your liver, as you may know, can store glucose and can put glucose out into the bloodstream. In your pancreas, that's what where your insulin is produced. So just by introducing the right probiotic strains, feeding them, having that butyrate produced, your body is naturally going to be working to best metabolize sugars from the foods that you have in your diet. Now, to get this butyrate produced, again, I kind of gave my fiber tip, but if I've ever chatted with you, if you're my Pendulum customer, or if you've been to any of the Pendulum nutrition sessions before, we have a huge focus on fiber because fiber is so vital for these strains. Now, the Akkermansia mucinophilia right here, basically that strain is our mucin regulator. So it lives literally in the lining of your gut. So it's living in the lining of your gut, regulating the lining of your gut. If you don't know about Akkermansia, you can go to our webpage. My coworker, Kristen, just did an amazing Ask Me Anything with John all about Akkermansia. So definitely encourage you to learn a little bit more about that. But yeah, this is the mechanism of how these strains work, and they all work a little bit differently. But Akkermansia, let me answer this. I did see Deborah. Okay, so Akkermansia, we are actually learning. So in the presence of B vitamins, Akkermansia produces this short chain fatty acid propionate. It's not on here. There's newer studies that support this, but that propionate is able to help with that GLP-1 regulation as well. So there is some thought that yes, Akkermansia can help support that glucose level as well. We do not personally have a study here at Pendulum behind Akkermansia solely in glucose levels. We have done the one with the 5-strain formulation. But there's several new studies and research coming out all the time about Akkermansia. Okay, so I do want to let the new customers and really our current customers know a little bit more about the program. So kind of gave a teaser at the beginning that we have this new CGM education program. So who is this for? It's for you if you are a PGC subscription customer. We have a requirement. You bring the CGM device and we're just helping you learn. And we want to help you learn as you're introducing this probiotic into your body. So you can really understand the foods that you're eating, see the impact, and do some really cool at-home testing. So basically for new PGC subscription customers, you'll gain insights into precision probiotics. So these are probiotics specifically chosen for a reason and how they can impact your health. We always encourage you to know what your health goals are and see how this is working for you. So through the program, we'll kind of teach you how to do that. You will learn, remember how we talked about carbs, protein, and fat, and I said, everyone's so different. Well, where does that leave you, right? What's your response? So we have some really great guided experiments that you will be completing. It's by your own choice. I'm not going to come to your house and force you to eat a certain food, but we encourage you if you'd like to try different things. We give you the opportunity to do that. And included in the program, you get a 45-minute call with a Pendulum dietitian, email and text support. We have some great on-demand education videos. So if you were seeing those numbers, or if you've never looked at your CGM report, or you don't know how to do that, we're going to teach you how to do that. And then those at-home experiments are really fun. We send one each week, and then you do get a personal report at the end based off all of your information. So doing a time check on myself, and I'm going to go back to a few other questions. Okay, I'm going to answer this one. So Sarah says she's on her first month with glucose control. Did she hear there is A1C testing included? So if you have signed up for the Pendulum glucose control, there's actually a health survey that goes out. I believe it goes out like 4 days after purchase. And if you take that and you would like to opt into the A1C, you just indicate that, yes, you have diabetes, and we do send you at-home tests if you would like that. So every 3 months while on Pendulum, you could have your A1C tested. And again, this is only for people with diabetes, just because if you don't have that diabetes, we wouldn't expect it to be significantly different for you as you're really just trying to prevent the onset of diabetes. This is Ken. Ken, thank you for this comment. So he's a CGM user and highly recommends having a glucose monitor just if you get a really unexpected reading from your CGM. So I do actually think that's really sound advice as well, Ken. If you see a number out of nowhere that you just do not trust, having a way to validate that would be a really cool thing. So great suggestion. Okay, Anne asks, and it's a really good question, Anne. So I'm not sure which probiotic Anne specifically is asking about, but she says, can you open capsules and take them with food or put them in a smoothie? So the thing about the Pendulum probiotics, and I'm going to go back to the slide, our strains are strictly anaerobic for the most part. And so that means if something's anaerobic and you expose it to oxygen, it will not survive. So it's not my recommendation to ever open the capsule before you take it. I would encourage you to always take those capsules with food, just because you don't want them sitting in your stomach for a long time either. The way that we encapsulate our probiotics, it's designed to be taken with food so it can burst closer to that large intestine. Very, very good question. Okay. So I have a question about what brand of CGM do I use? And they specifically find a certain, I'm not going to say the name, inaccurate, but what I will say is I personally don't have a preferred brand. I myself also don't have diabetes, so I'm not wearing one daily, but I think if you're curious about the best like brand for you, that diabetes wise is a great resource. And then if you're finding things are just, 10 or 20 points off of a finger prick, that actually could still be an accurate reading, because remember, interstitial fluid and glucose are not always going to be a side-by-side match. Let's see. Okay, Michelle is asking, what is the best time to take glucose control? With the first bite of food or a little bit prior to your meal? Really good question. So we just want you to take it with food. For most people, that's going to be typically right before the meal. The main thing is, think about, you just don't want to swallow that Pendulum glucose control and not have any food moving through your system. You want to make sure you're starting that digestive process, starts in the mouth, following it with that meal. I don't think there's like a magic number, but I personally wouldn't wait. I wouldn't take it and then forget to eat. So whatever works best for you. If it works best for you to have the first few bites, I think that's great. Or if you take it right before, I feel really confident it's going to get down to your microbiome. Okay, Martha says, I just started using the glucose support and have noticed her fasting glucose levels decreasing. Amazing, Martha. That's actually before A1C, a lot of people will like text me a week later or email me after they start taking it and say my fasting numbers are already decreasing. So love you're seeing that. I started taking glucose control 10 days ago and metformin 30 days ago. If my glucose drops to normal level, can you potentially stop taking metformin and continue taking glucose support? Okay, really good question. So I would always recommend to run that by your medical provider. Of course, I would never want someone to, drop a medication without discussing with the provider, because sometimes you have different plans of how to taper certain things. However, I would love to highlight there is something called diabetes remission, and several people actually are able to meet that. So diabetes remission is basically if you can get that A1C lower than that 5.7, get off your medications. And I believe it's 3 months or longer. If you can do that, it's considered diabetes remission. So yes, it potentially, Martha, could be very possible for you to do that. I would just encourage you, to share that as a goal with your provider, that you want to get off medication, and then make a plan to do that. It might be, decreasing that metformin. It might be just stopping it completely. But kudos to you. And I'm really excited for you that you're already seeing those early wins. Okay. So let me go to these next few slides, just so as I answer these, some of these are about the different probiotics. So to find the right Pendulum product for you, I would say, again, if you have a diagnosis of either prediabetes, type 2, or a family history, I would definitely encourage you to take that Pendulum glucose control. It's the first and only medical probiotic studied in people with diabetes to lower glucose. So that would be my recommendation. Now, we also have the Akkermansia, which again, our gut lining regulator. There's several reasons why that might be the right probiotic for you, and highly encourage you to go watch that All About Akkermansia to learn more. It was super informational. And then we have that Clostridium butyricum strain, the GI repair. And this includes a butyrate producer. So a lot of people are aware of the benefits of butyrate. Often people that struggle with different GI diagnosis, whether it be constipation and or diarrhea, typically really find this GI repair very, very beneficial. So, and then let me show this next slide just as I wrap up. This does have some of those ingredients listed for you as well, if you're curious about what in the world is in these different strains, as I answer these last few questions. And just so you know, if your question doesn't get answered live, we will be sending out some of the answers post session. So Just know what we see them. That's why we just did the Q&A this time, so we can collect all of them and we'll send you guys the answers. So how long does it take to see results after being on a pre or probiotic supplement like Akkermansia? What would you expect to see if you have low Akkermansia and begin supplementing? Amazing question. So we typically do recommend close to that 3-month mark is when we would suggest for people to take the probiotic. So specific to the glucose control, we know people saw significant results closer to that 3-month mark. Again, as some of our customers just shared, 10 days in, already seeing some results. So the answer to that is very individual to you, Brandy. I don't know the I don't even know the current state of exactly what's going on in my gut. We don't know what all bacteria lives in there unless we're doing things to figure that out on the daily. So I would say we definitely recommend at least 2 to 3 months to start to see some of those longer benefits. And then if you don't have any of these strains and you introduce them, again, I would encourage you to figure out what your health goals are. So oftentimes if you're taking this for reasons related to the GI tract, check in once or twice per month and say, have I seen improvements yet? You could use your phone to log. You can use an app to log. Akkermansia, I'll just share, customers are telling me changes. They have changes in their skin, energy levels. People are taking this for prevention purposes with different disease states. So definitely there's a variety of things you could experience, but I would have to know, help you kind of figure out, well, what is my health goal and what are my metrics? And really, I'd love for everyone to kind of ask themselves that as they're taking a probiotic. Okay, so, here's a really good, so Sherry said, FYI, thank you, Sherry, Costco Pharmacy has incredible discounts for members for the Dexcom sensors for out-of-pocket and non-insurance. And I echo that. I do know when I used to work for a clinic, people that had diabetes, they often did find really good benefits at Costco. And also the community Walgreens sometimes with the Libre will also have a affordable price, but the Dexcom, I think Costco has a good working relationship with Dexcom. Let's see. Here's a really good question. Okay. So Samira asks, does the microbiome affect glucose numbers after eating food? Yes. So we actually found in our clinical study, 33% reduction just by introducing that probiotic, right? Everything, it was a clinical trial. So everything else was to stay the same. People saw those glucose spikes decrease roughly 33% after they ate. And that was at the 90-day mark. So part of the CGM education program, which anyone could do this at home as well, we just set it up in a really fun educational way. I would love if you start to take this product and you're wearing a CGM, do a test, try a meal that hey, this causes a glucose spike. Try it again in 3 months, see what the difference is. Now, I think there are 42 factors that we know can impact glucose. So this might be something you want to test a few times just so you can rule out other variables. But yes, I certainly do know that the microbiome can shift those post-meal glucose numbers. Let's see. Okay. So Debbie, I think I was going to answer this for you. So can I talk about taking the GI repair and Akkermansia together? I would love to. So we have the Akkermansia, the GI repair, and the glucose control. So if you're interested in taking the Akkermansia and the Clostridium butyrate come together, you certainly can. That would just be getting the 2 probiotic strains. So you're going to be getting a butyrate producer in your gut lining regulator. And then when you get the glucose control, you do get 5 strains total. So you're going to get a few other butyrate producers, some acetate producers, some general gut health. We also have a bifido strain in here as well. These are just the Pendulum exclusive strains that we have listed here. So here's that bifidobacteria strain. But certainly, I do have customers that take both of these. But if you're interested in any of these other strains, in addition, you could do that. These are single strains, so you could, that's a great thing to pair together. Let's see. So Maureen asks, I've heard there are benefits to eating fats and proteins before the carbs during your meal. Is there any thought on this? So I actually think that there is some science that shows this as well. More so, even there's been a study that shows eating the non-starchy veggies that's coming to the forefront of my mind before a meal has been able to decrease your glucose spike. So prime example, I think about eating a side salad right before you start your meal. That could be a fun kind of test that you could do at home. And we digest fats, protein, and carbs all at different rates. And so, yes, I certainly think that actually, there's someone called the Glucose Goddess on Instagram. I'm going to give her a shout out. I do believe she's going to speak with Pendulum in October, but she has made it her mission to test things and share her results. So she tests things like this often and shares her experiences. And I think that would be a great thing for our customers. If you wanted to see her personal experience about what she's learned about pairing some of these foods together, that would be a really great. She's got some great visuals to share. Okay, so Wesley asked, this is a great question, if we've seen success with intermittent fasting. So there are so many studies on intermittent fasting, and I don't know what success you're referring to, so I can't say yes or no, but for a lot of people, they have been able to see benefits with intermittent fasting. So there is some research showing it can be potentially beneficial for the microbiome. I will say that it's not the same for every single person. So if you are an intermittent faster, meaning you're only eating between certain hours of the day and you're still struggling with glucose spikes, maybe in the morning, that might be a time that you kind of play around with, okay, is this the right thing for me? But I do have a lot of customers that intermittent fast. If you are someone that does and you want to take Pendulum, just wait till your first meal of the day to take that first dose. Really good question. And okay, I'm going to have this be the last question. Unfortunately, we're running out of time today, and I promise we'll send the rest of the questions over to you guys. But Sarah said she's been low carb for years, and she tried a greenish banana, and it did not touch my CGM glucose reading. So if you've heard us talk before at Pendulum, we love to teach about different types of fibers. Again, resistant starch. That's a different type of fiber found in green bananas, potatoes, and rice when they're cooked and cooled, as well as some other foods. And oftentimes it does not spike people's glucose, and it feeds your microbiome strains. So go to Pendulum, and there's a nutrition guide you can download on the website. If you go to the nutrition page, it's pendulumlife.com/nourish, I believe, and you can actually download that free nutrition guide. Thank you for sharing, Sarah. Okay, so if you have any more questions, actually just try to submit them really quick in the chat so we can, or the Q&A, so we can have those recorded. You guys have been amazing. Thank you so much for attending. I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting and end the webinar. But thank you guys for joining. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.